Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a side of medieval life that's gritty, dangerous, and anything but romantic. Picture dark alleyways, whispered deals, and a job where survival wasn't guaranteed past sunrise. Think you'd last a single night like a working girl? Spoiler, you wouldn't. So before we start, like and subscribe, but only if this sounds like your kind of history. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's slip quietly into the past. Wake up, darling. The straw in your mattress has shifted again, and now there's a sharp piece poking your left kidney. Congratulations, you're alive, which means you've got to get up and start earning before the day slips away or someone else steals your regulars. That's right. You're a working girl in 1348, which is what polite people say instead of prostitute, mostly because they're the ones paying your wages. The air in your rented room smells like wood smoke, old shoes, and regret. You slept under a wool blanket that's more whole than fabric, next to a wall so thin you could hear your neighbor practicing his Gregorian chants at 3 a.m. Lovely. Now roll out of your straw mattress, carefully, because one wrong move and your knee will pop like an old cheese curd, and start the day. First comes appearance management, also known as tricking men into thinking you don't live in medieval squalor. You wash your face with yesterday's water. It's cold. It smells faintly of someone else's bath, but it's better than nothing. And nothing is the leading beauty regimen in this era. You tug on your best gown, which is your only gown that hasn't been chewed by rats. The neckline is deliberately low, because that's your best asset, and also because high necklines mean you're a nun, and that ship has sailed. You try to pin your hair up in a way that says, available but classy, then dab a scrap of rose oil on your wrists to distract from the less charming smells of the establishment. Downstairs, the house begins to stir. Mistress Adela, who manages the place with the enthusiasm of a tax collector and the charm of a wet broom, is already puffing away on her morning pipe. She's wearing the same dress she slept in, which tells you it's going to be a busy day. You get your assignments. 3 clients already waiting. 1 is new, 1 is sober, and 1 is asking for you specifically. That's the holy trifecta. Now the real work begins. Client 1 is a baker's apprentice. He smells like warm bread and yeast, which is about as close to a compliment as the job gets. He's shy, polite, and leaves a whole copper coin on the dresser afterward. A true romantic. Client 2 is a fishmonger. Yes, it's as bad as it sounds. You try not to breathe through your nose and focus on the ceiling beams. He doesn't talk much, which is good, because when he does, he uses words like milky wench. You nod, smile, count the minutes, and add a mental note to never eat herring again. Client 3 is that one traveling cloth merchant who always insists on conversation. He wants to tell you about wool prices in Calais. You pretend to care. You fake a laugh. You tell him he's fascinating, which, to be clear, is the biggest lie you'll tell today. In between clients, there's cleanup. You sweep the common room, which means pushing dirt into smaller, more decorative piles, and reset the bed linens, or what's left of them. You freshen up. You splash more rose water. You fix your hair again. Your body aches, your feet throb, and your lower back is staging a small rebellion. But there's no time for sympathy in this business. The afternoon brings a lull, which means it's time for economic strategy. You sit near the hearth with the other girls, adjusting garters and exchanging gossip like it's currency. You trade tips, which clients are generous, which ones lie about payment, and who's got lice, again. One girl swears she's learned to spot the wealthy ones by the shine on their belt buckles. Another insists it's all in the shoes. You just hope no one stiffs you twice in a row. By twilight, the evening rush begins. That's when the real money shows up. Merchants with bellies full of ale, minor knights with egos larger than their landholdings, and scribes who want to talk first. You light the candles, adjust your neckline, and prepare yourself for round two. The flow of customers is steady. You work. You charm. You pivot between flirtation, patience, and the occasional cold glare. Sometimes it's easy. Other times, it's a negotiation. And always, always, you're calculating, how much is this worth? How long will it take? And will I still be able to walk tomorrow? Historical curiosity pill. Some cities required working girls to wear distinctive ribbons or special garments, just in case you forgot your job title. Regulations varied, but enforcement usually depended on whether the local magistrate had a tab running. By midnight, your earnings are in a little pouch tucked in your bodice. A mix of copper coins, some silver if you're lucky, and one carved button from a drunk who thought it was worth something. It's not. You wash up with lukewarm water and a scrap of cloth. You rub your arms where the bruises will bloom by morning. You stare at the flickering candlelight and wonder if anyone else in town has to pretend so much for so little. Then you crawl into your straw-stuffed mattress. The room is quiet. Downstairs, someone is still laughing loudly over ale, and the fires burn down to glowing embers. You exhale. Your body relaxes, inch by inch. Another day's work done. Another night survived. You wake up to the sound of someone vomiting in the alley below your window. A musical start to another glamorous workday. The candle burned out hours ago, the straw mattress smells vaguely like cheese, and your hip is sore from lying on a lump you now suspect is either a rock or last week's lost spoon. There's no time to dwell. You have a shift to prepare for. Downstairs, Mistress Adela is already pacing the common room with a scowl that could curdle milk. Her mood is bad, which means someone shorted her again. Likely a noble's second son who swore he'd send payment via his steward. Translation, you've been robbed, and he'll be back next week like nothing happened. This is where the real challenge begins. Not the clients. No, they're just sweaty complications in poorly made boots. The real enemy is the economy. And unlike your clients, it never gets tired. You eat a heel of stale bread soaked in last night's beer, which you tell yourself counts as breakfast. Then it's upstairs to prepare. Hair smoothed, gown brushed off, teeth checked for turnip bits. You examine yourself in a cracked bit of polished metal nailed to the wall. It's the closest thing you have to a mirror, and it only reflects lies. By mid-morning, you're downstairs with the other girls, ready for the day shift. You each have your corner. Anna near the hearth. She's the curvy one by medieval standards, which means she's eaten this week. Lisette takes the window seat. She's new and still believes men are redeemable. And you, of course, get the back alcove. Less light, more privacy, and fewer surprises from angry wives. Client 1 is early, always is. He's a scribe who insists on reading you poetry he clearly wrote on the way over. You smile, you pretend to care. He pays half up front, which is rare. The rest, he says, he'll bring after Vespers. You know exactly what that means. You're being paid in hope. Again. After he leaves, Mistress Adela counts the coins, one short. Next time, take his boots until he coughs up the rest, she mutters, snatching the copper from your palm. These scribes think ink makes them clever. You nod. Mentally, you add him to the list, the growing list, of men who owe you more than coins. Now, a little context. In most towns, you're technically legal. Licensed, even, by the local authorities. That means taxes. Yes, even in 1348, you're still giving a cut to men who've never once asked you how your day was. A portion of your earnings goes to the city, another to Adela, and whatever's left, you tuck into the hem of your dress, or hide under your mattress, if you don't mind sharing it with the fleas. Historical curiosity pill. In parts of France, working girls were required by law to wear yellow hoods so they wouldn't be mistaken for honest women. Naturally, tailors made a fortune selling slightly off yellow cloaks to curious, honest women. Branding works both ways. As the day stretches on, the clients become blurrier, and so do your boundaries. There's the baker again, smelling like yeast and exhaustion. The merchant who tries to haggle like you're a sack of onions. A priest's servant who insists he's only here on business. Every interaction is a negotiation, not just of price, but of tone, timing, touch. One wrong word, and a client might storm out. Or worse, stay longer, thinking you're in love. And then there's the girl everyone hates. Her name is Colette. She used to work down by the docks, but now she's here. Younger, blonder, with a new dress and a mouthful of teeth that haven't been chipped by stale crusts. She charges less, laughs more, and somehow gets the sweet-talking clients who used to ask for you. You're not jealous. You're just aware. Painfully, mathematically aware that your best years are behind you, and your knees creak when you stand up too fast. Mid-afternoon brings a break, which means collapsing onto a bench and rubbing your ankles while pretending you're not tired enough to fall asleep sitting up. Lisette joins you, her face red from slapping a client who got handsy too early. What did Adela say? You ask. She said next time, wait until he pays. Ah, yes. The age-old code of conduct. Money first, dignity second. Evening arrives, and with it, the richer men, the ones who come with coins already in hand and guilt already in their eyes. You fix your bodice again. Add a dab of that rose oil that's now mostly gone. Then you light a candle, smooth your gown, and smile like you've never been disappointed in your life. The rest of the night is work. Steady, unromantic, complicated work. You laugh on cue. You make them feel charming. You remember names and fake anniversaries. You tell one man he's the only one who's ever made you feel this way. Then you repeat the exact sentence, word for word, an hour later for someone else. You get paid in coins, promises, buttons, and once, memorably, a whole cooked pigeon. Cold, but edible. At last, after the final door shuts and the candles gutter low, you climb back to your room. Your body aches like you've walked the length of the kingdom. You peel off your dress and check the hem for coins. 3 silver, 4 copper. A decent haul. Outside, the wind howls through the alley. You lie down on your straw bed, curl beneath your cloak, and exhale. One more day down. One more night survived. You close your eyes. And just before sleep claims you, you hear Lisette mutter from the room next door, "If one more man asks, if I actually enjoy it." You smile, because tomorrow, someone absolutely will. The sun's barely up, and already the church bell is doing its best impression of a hammer to your skull. You try to roll over, but your entire body creaks like an old door hinge in a haunted cottage. Your hip has gone numb, your ankles are stiff, and something bit your leg in the night. Again. Possibly a rat. Possibly a flea with ambition. You sit up, brush straw off your shift, and sigh deeply. It's laundry day, which means pretending you're going to do laundry and then not doing it because the water's cold, the soap's expensive, and you're already late to work. Again. Downstairs, the usual chaos is already in motion. Mistress Adela is swatting a drunk out of the hallway with a broom and shouting about decorum. You suspect she's the only person in the building who still believes in that word. A pot of something that aspires to be breakfast bubbles in the hearth. It smells like onions and burnt hope. Lisette limps down the stairs behind you, one shoe on, one shoe missing. Her eyes are half-lidded, her hair tangled, and she looks like she fought sleep itself and lost. "No show again?" you ask. She nods. "Told me he'd be back after confession." Well, technically that means never. Because here's the thing they don't write in the courtly love songs. Men lie, constantly, especially when trousers are involved. Today, you're booked solid, at least according to Adela's grease-stained ledger. 4 clients before sundown. You start with client 1, a tanner who smells like death, warmed over, and insists on calling you darlin', in a way that makes your skin attempt to detach. You ask him for payment up front. He looks offended, like you've questioned the honor of a man whose job is literally boiling cow skin in lye. He pays anyway. Grumbling. Always grumbling. After that, it's client 2, a younger man, apprentice carpenter. Nervous, hands too soft to be dangerous. He talks about his mother a little too much and leaves you an extra coin wrapped in linen for your troubles. You don't know whether to feel flattered or insulted, so you decide on both and pocket the linen just in case it's cleaner than your own. Then comes client 3, and with him, complications. He's been here before, several times. Always polite, always generous, never says much. But he looks at you like you're not just a body with breath, which is both flattering and deeply suspicious. You've learned that when a man starts acting like he sees you, he's either about to declare his undying love or his undying debt. He calls you Margot, not girl or sweetin, or anything whispered behind a cloak. Just your name. It throws you off every time. He sits on the bed and doesn't touch you. Just talks. "I saw you near the church yesterday," he says. "I wasn't inside," you reply, fast. Instinct. "I know, but you looked up at it, like you were praying." You weren't. You were checking for loose tiles. But fine, let him believe it. He's the kind that might want to rescue you, which, in your line of work, usually means move you into his shed and expect you to wash his socks in exchange for vague promises and poorly cooked turnips. You've seen it happen. Girls who fall for it, who walk out with a man's coin and never come back. 3 months later, they're back again. Thinner, paler, fewer teeth. Turns out being someone's secret doesn't pay half as well as being someone's shame in public. Still, you smile at him. You listen. You rest your hand on his knee in a way that suggests warmth, but nothing more. And when he leans in close, you kiss his cheek, then gently escort him to the door. Later, Mistress Adela corners you near the stairs. "What's with that one?" she asks, lighting her pipe. "Thinks he's in love," you say. She snorts. "Let him. Love costs double." You laugh, but not out loud, because you know love doesn't pay. Not here. In fact, it costs more than anything. Historical curiosity pill. Contrary to what moralists claimed, many medieval working girls had long-term clients they preferred. Regulars who treated them kindly and paid on time. It wasn't romantic, but it was practical. Emotional investment. That was riskier than catching something from the bucket of bathwater. By sunset, you've made enough to eat something hot tonight. Stew from the inn across the square. Heavy on the barley, light on the rat. You sit in the corner with Lisette and Anna, tearing bread with your teeth and discussing the latest gossip. Anna says Colette got slapped by a priest's wife near the well. She told her she was stealing souls, Anna says between bites. Colette just blinked and said, "Only if they pay." There's laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from exhaustion and shared misery. You head upstairs to rest, the day's earnings tucked safely under your mattress, inside an old glove stitched closed with string. You lie back. The ceiling beams creak. Somewhere below, someone's playing a lute very badly. A client, probably. Or a drunk with poor impulse control. You close your eyes. You think about the man who called you Margot. Maybe you remember how he looked at you, like you were something precious. Then you remember the stew, the 4 clients, the ache in your shoulders. And just like that, the fantasy fades. It starts with a cough, just a small one, dry, harmless, the kind you'd ignore if you were anyone else. But you're not just anyone. You're Margot, and you work in a profession where a sore throat can be career-ending. You sit up in bed, squint at the dusty shaft of sunlight cutting through the crack in the shutters, and try not to panic. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the damp, or the mold, or the fact that your room is roughly the same humidity as a root cellar and twice as fragrant. Downstairs, the day is already limping along. Someone's spilled a chamber pot in the hallway again. The smell is biblical. You tiptoe around it, muttering a prayer to St. Clair, the patron of, well, not much help in this department. Breakfast is yesterday's bread dipped in weak ale. You chew, you swallow, you cough again. Still dry, still worrying. Drink something warm, Lisette says, handing you a chipped mug. Or gargle with wine. You mean our wine? Anna asks from the hearth, looking horrified. It's for clients. Margot shrugs. So am I. And that, right there, is the daily riddle. You are the product, the provider, the package, and the shelf life. And no one wants damaged goods. You pull yourself together. Rouge to hide the pallor. Ribbon in your hair to distract from the circles under your eyes. The first client is already waiting. You see his boots by the door. Good leather. A merchant. The kind who pretends to care about your feelings until he remembers he's running late for Vespers. He's followed by a blacksmith with hands like frying pans and breath like he's been licking the inside of a chimney. He talks about horses. You nod. You pretend to care deeply about horses. After him, a boy barely old enough to shave who fumbles through the entire process and leaves red-faced and apologizing. He drops a coin, panics, and bolts. You pick it up. Silver. You're having a good day. Or you were, because just after noon, the door slams open, and in walks the one person every working girl fears more than a jealous wife or a tight-fisted client. The town healer. He doesn't knock. He never does. He just sniffs, scowls, and starts listing who looks sick and who looks sinful, which, in his view, are usually the same thing. He eyes you. You look pale, Margot. You smile sweetly. Must be love. He doesn't laugh. He never does. Adela intercepts him, with the kind of smile that makes children cry. She's fine, fresh as spring lettuce. She coughed. She choked on a compliment. Still, he lingers. He pokes around. He picks up your cup and sniffs it like it might bite. You hold your breath until he finally leaves, muttering something about hygiene and holy water. Because if he had decided you were sick, that'd be it. Out. No discussion. The town might be willing to ignore sin, but illness? That's bad for business. No one wants to pay for pleasure if they think they'll die doing it. Historical curiosity pill. In many medieval towns, sex workers were subject to mandatory health inspections, often by local clergy or healers, neither of whom had medical training or basic manners. If deemed unfit, a woman could be barred from working, or worse, fined for spreading corruption. The rest of the day runs on adrenaline and denial. You keep moving, keep working, keep pretending that your knees don't ache and your head isn't spinning, and you definitely aren't keeping track of how many times you've coughed. You bandage a blister on your foot, you re-tie your gown, you replait your hair. Everything is a performance, and the audience pays extra if the show comes with sighs and blushes. Near evening, you catch Colette. Yes, that Colette. Whispering to a client who asked for you by name. She smiles sweetly as she redirects him to her room. You grit your teeth. You don't say anything. You're not surprised. In your line of work, loyalty lasts only as long as the coin in a man's pocket. By candlelight, you patch a tear in your shift with thread stolen from the laundry pile and listen to Anna talk about saints. She always gets chatty when she's tired. They say Saint Margaret protects women in childbirth, she says, chewing the edge of a fingernail. Great, you reply. Let me know when they find one who protects women from men. That gets a laugh. Later, as you lie in bed, you can't help but think about how thin the walls are, how everything feels worn, yourself included. The cough comes again. You press your hand to your chest. It's still dry, still small, but it's there. You stare up at the rafters, listen to the wind clawing at the shutters. Somewhere in the building, someone's humming a lullaby they probably haven't sung since they were a child. You close your eyes and hope tomorrow no one notices how tired you look. It's raining. Of course it's raining. It's always raining when something dramatic happens in your life, even if the sky has no idea who you are. You sit near the hearth, wrapped in your cloak, watching the gray outside trickle through the warped shutters. The fire crackles, half-hearted. Even it's too tired to be lively. Beside you, Lisette sharpens a sewing needle with the concentration of someone imagining it going directly into a client's backside. Across the room, Anna is asleep on a bench, open-mouthed, one hand still wrapped around a crust of bread she fell asleep chewing. Mistress Adela shuffles in, her hair askew and her scowl in full force. She counts coins, curses the weather, and kicks the hearth like it insulted her. The mood is low. You feel it in your bones, not the weather, the weight. Because here's the secret no one says aloud. You're thinking of leaving. Not because there's a knight in shining armor. Not because you've been saved by some wandering poet with feelings and no money. No, you're thinking of leaving because you're tired. Utterly, soul-deep tired. And you want to go before the job leaves you first. Curled up in a corner with a cough that doesn't stop, and a priest muttering prayers over a body nobody paid for. You stretch your legs. Your knees pop. Your hips ache. You're not old, not by any measure, but this work doesn't wait for time to wear you down. It helps. The day is slow. Rain keeps most clients away. Even lust has limits when the road is mud and your boots leak. You spend the afternoon darning linens and mentally reviewing your options, which take about 30 seconds. You can't marry, at least not here. Your name's known. Your trade is whispered in doorways, and carved into tavern benches. You could move to another town, another city. But that requires money and a plan, and you're fresh out of both. You could join a convent, if one would have you. You hear some will take in fallen women if they're properly penitent and willing to scrub floors for a decade. Or you could beg. Become one of the silent figures outside the cathedral with a shawl and a bowl and a look that says nothing and everything at once. Or, and this is the daring one, you could reinvent yourself. Move to a market town, call yourself a widow, sell herbs or thread or half-lies about your noble bloodline. Pretend you were never here, never in this room, never on this mattress, never under those men. You know it won't be easy, but neither is this. Historical curiosity pill. Some women in medieval towns did manage to leave the trade. They remarried, started small businesses, or worked as midwives and healers. But it took luck, cunning, and the ability to lie with a straight face while still smiling at the tax collector. Evening falls, candles are lit. The stew burns slightly. Again, Lisette gets into an argument with Colette about who's been taking the good shift near the fire. You mediate, like always. Adela barks at all three of you, then forgets what she was yelling about halfway through and lights her pipe instead. Later, a client comes in asking for you. You send Anna. He doesn't notice the switch. That night, you lie on your straw bed, one hand resting on the pouch of coins hidden in the mattress lining. It's not much, but it's enough to get you a few towns over. Enough for a new name. A new dress, maybe. One with sleeves. One you chose. You stare at the beams above, tracing the cracks like a map. Tomorrow, you'll leave. Not with a parade. Not with tears. Just one girl, in a borrowed cloak, slipping out between rain puddles and shop shutters. And no one will notice. They'll talk for a day or two. Someone will say you ran off with a sailor. Someone else will swear they saw you on the road to Canterbury. But within a week, Colette will be in your corner. Lisette will be sewing your old shift. And Mistress Adela will scowl and mutter, "She was decent," when she wanted to be. And you'll be somewhere else, buying onions with your own coin, sleeping in a room that smells like rain and wood and maybe, just maybe, a little freedom. Because in a world where almost no woman gets to choose her ending, you've managed to slip away with yours. Quiet, unremarked, but yours. The second history is why you wouldn't last an evening as a patron of a medieval brothel. If your idea of a night out involves candlelight, soft music, and someone remembering your name, welcome to disappointment. You are now a patron of a medieval brothel, circa 1352. The 100 Years' War is sputtering along like a drunken juggler. Half the population is either dead or coughing ominously, and your choices for leisure time are as grim as your bathwater. Meet Edric. He's 42 years old, which in medieval England is just short of ancient, and he's managed to climb one full rung up from peasantry by selling imported woolens that definitely weren't taxed properly. He has most of his teeth, 2 functioning knees, and a wife who is, let's say, spiritually distant. So tonight, with coin jangling in his belt and moral ambiguity swirling like mist off the Thames, Edric strolls down a lane suspiciously named Rose Alley. Now, let's set the mood. The air is thick with smoke, sewage, and a distinct note of despair. Lanterns flicker over narrow cobbles where rats conduct business more efficiently than the guilds. The brothel, charmingly called the Bishop's Collar, sits wedged between a butcher and a man who sharpens knives and possibly collects souls. It's technically illegal, officially frowned upon, and functionally essential to the economy. Think of it as early urban therapy, but with worse lighting. Edric pushes through the warped oak door and is greeted by a wall of smells. Cheap perfume battles unsuccessfully against mildew and damp straw. You inhale and immediately regret it. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a lute, like it owes him money. The madam, Mistress Sibella, greets him with the smile of someone who has seen too much, charged for it, and is now charging extra for conversation. She's 50-something, probably older, draped in a velvet gown that's seen more winters than Edward III. Her job is part hostess, part bouncer, and part unpaid therapist. "Evening, Master Edric," she says with a wink. "Back for another dose of penance, are we?" This, you must understand, is a house of regulated sin. Technically, the church hates it. Realistically, the church owns the building and collects rent. There's even a priest 2 doors down who absolves patrons as long as they don't bleed on the confessional. Historical curiosity pill. In many English towns, brothels were licensed by the local bishop. The logic was simple. If you couldn't stop sin, you might as well tax it. Now, Edric isn't here for love. No one is. He's here for a half-hour escape from marital frostbite and an excuse to avoid paying his tavern tab. He's shown to a narrow room with a cot, a jug of watered wine, and a curtain that offers slightly less privacy than a chicken coop. The woman who joins him is named Ismena, or maybe Alison. Names are fluid. What isn't fluid is the bucket of lye water in the corner and the faint scent of roasted onions someone spilled last week. Here's the thing about medieval brothels. They're not glamorous. They're not romantic. They're transactional hygiene gambles. The linens haven't been changed since St. Swithin's Day, and the most luxurious amenity is a wooden comb chained to the wall to discourage lice sharing. But for all its filth and absurdity, there is an odd normalcy to it. Patrons range from disillusioned cobblers to knights with more coin than charm. No one speaks of love. That's for minstrels and liars. Here, things are simpler. Services rendered, coin exchanged, guilt postponed until Sunday Mass. The truth, and you'll want to sit down for this, is that many women working in brothels didn't do it by choice. Some were indentured for debts, some had no other means of survival, and some had been thrown out of more respectable homes for being inconveniently alive. Mistress Sibella keeps a ledger thicker than the parish Bible, not just with names and payments, but with aliases, ailments, and the occasional warning, "Don't let Edgar near the lamp." Again. Ismena, or Alison, is kind enough not to ask questions. She tells Edric about a tooth she lost last week and shows him a small charm against pregnancy that she swears by. It's a rabbit's foot tied with horsehair. And no, it doesn't work. But it's better than the alternative. Absolutely nothing. And you may ask, what of protection? A fine question. The medieval answer, sheep gut, tied with ribbon, reusable. You're welcome. Back in the hallway, a younger man is weeping softly into a turnip he brought as a gift. Upstairs, someone sings off-key about St. Agnes. Downstairs, 2 women argue over a comb. Outside, a town watchman walks past, pretending not to notice the 6 men loitering near the entrance, one of whom may be his cousin. Edric leaves the brothel an hour later, with a lighter purse and heavier thoughts. He'll return. They always do. But for now, he shuffles home through the fog, wondering if his wife will notice the turnip is missing. And if you think this was just a medieval man's problem, oh, just wait. Because next time, we meet the women who worked behind those crooked doors and how their lives were far more complicated than any dimly lit transaction could reveal. It's tempting to think that the women of a medieval brothel spent their days lounging in velvet robes, sipping mead, and waiting for emotionally distant men to show up and misunderstand them. In reality, life behind the Crimson Curtain was less romantic novella and more tactical endurance trial with bonus rats. Let's drop back into the bishop's collar, where the floor creaks ominously, the ceiling leaks optimistically, and the nearest thing to luxury is a three-legged stool with only 2 splinters. It's early morning, which means the customers have staggered out, or been shoved out, and the women are already scrubbing, stitching, or swearing softly at the lice. Say hello to Ismena. She's been working here for nearly a year, which in brothel time is roughly equivalent to surviving 3 Viking raids and a papal inquisition. She's 27, which everyone here calls old, but she has all her teeth and can read, which makes her basically royalty. Now, before you judge, remember this. Women like Ismena rarely chose this life. She was born the daughter of a cooper, married at 15 to a man with the personality of boiled beans, and widowed by 17 when he tried to joust a pig and lost. With no dowry, no family land, and a distinct lack of convent interest, her options were limited. It was either sex work, starvation, or pretending to be a leper, and the leper colony had a waiting list. Historical curiosity pill. In many medieval cities, especially London, brothels were legalized but heavily monitored. Women had to wear special clothing, often striped hoods, to distinguish themselves, and they were not allowed to solicit outside their assigned area, on pain of public flogging. The work is constant. When the men leave, the women clean. The sheets, such as they are, must be soaked in lye, scraped, and hung over a line behind the tannery. The scent combination is memorable. Garments are mended, floors swept with a bundle of sticks that laughs in the face of efficiency, and the common room restocked with thin ale and bread that could double as weaponry. Breakfast, if it arrives, is yesterday's pottage reheated over a fire that prefers smoke to flame. There's always a stale onion floating in it, like a lost soul. Conversation, though, is lively. Ismena gossips with Lene, a sharp-tongued girl from Devon who swears she once serviced a bishop and stole his ring. There's also Avis, who is currently 7 months pregnant and still working because no one can afford to stop. No one here is paid directly. The brothel keeps the coin, provides food, lodging, and the occasional herbal potion. Once a month, Mistress Sibella distributes earnings, which look suspiciously like IOUs and turnips. But still, this is safer than the street. Marginally. Sometimes patrons are kind. More often, they're drunk, confused, or trying to pay in salted fish. The women are expected to smile, flatter, and only scream loud enough to not disturb the Lord's falconer who lives next door. If things go wrong, and they often do, Mistress Sibella handles it. She's not just the madam. She's the medic, the judge, and the last line of defense between the girls and a man with a bad temper and an empty flask. Today, a physician is visiting, which is just code for a man with a suspicious collection of herbs and a traveling flask of vinegar. He checks on Avis, tells Ismena she has an excess of humors, and recommends purging or leeches. She chooses neither and offers him a crust of bread, which he accepts like it's a diamond. Of course, the brothel has rules. No fighting, no stealing from each other, no drinking before sundown, unless it's someone's name day or a plague wave is nearby, and absolutely, under no circumstances, can you fall in love with a patron. That gets you thrown out faster than you can say penance. So, but love still happens. Quietly. Stupidly. Line has a soft spot for a tanner's apprentice who brings her dried fruit and hasn't yet asked for anything in return. He might be sweet, or he might be waiting until her defenses are down. Everyone pretends it's sweet, because the truth would be too sad. At noon, a friar walks by and blesses the building, while deliberately not making eye contact. The girls wave. They know him by name. By sunset, the alley is alive again. Edric may return, or some other sad-eyed man in search of comfort that won't talk back. Ismena sighs, tugs her bodice tighter, and checks the bucket under the bed for rodents. Lena adjusts her striped hood. Avis rubs her belly, and Mistress Sibella lights a single tallow candle that does nothing to dispel the gloom, but smells vaguely of cheese. Behind every man who walks through that crooked door, there's a woman with a name, a story, and a ledger entry that determines whether she eats meat this week. And behind every smile she gives, there's calculation, survival, and the quiet defiance of someone who keeps living. Not because it's easy, but because there's no other option. And as the curtain is drawn, and the loot starts up again with renewed vengeance, you realize something. The brothel isn't the lowest part of town. It's the most honest. Next time, we'll walk outside, past the stench and scandal, and meet the neighbors. Because nothing says good Christian community like pretending not to know what's happening across the alley, while quietly taking notes. You might think that medieval brothels operated in the shadows, tucked far away from polite society, perhaps somewhere between the town dump and a bog haunted by regret. But no. The Bishop's Collar sits proudly in the middle of Rose Alley, just 3 cobblestones away from a bakery, 2 from the apothecary, and exactly 1 inconvenient glance from the local priest's house. Because here's the truth no one admits. Everyone knows the brothel is there, and no one really wants it gone. Not the baker who sells extra loaves on Friday nights. Not the apothecary who discreetly profits from every rash, potion, and mysterious belly ailment. And certainly not the priest who mutters something about moral vigilance, but has been seen more than once adjusting his robes just a bit too quickly near the back alley door. Now, Rose Alley is a place of many trades. There's a cooper who drinks too much and repairs barrels badly, a washerwoman who curses in 4 languages and 2 dialects of goat, and a butcher whose sausages are widely suspected to contain more imagination than meat. These are the collar's neighbors, and if they pretend to look away, it's only so they can hear better through the wall. Take old Marjorie, the fishwife with breath like low tide and opinions sharp enough to wound. She loudly declares the brothel a disgrace to decency every market day, and yet seems oddly well informed about which patrons linger too long and who likes the red-haired one. You suspect she'd make a fine spy if she weren't already employed full-time by gossip. Then there's Osbert the scrivener, who copies legal documents in one half of his shop and writes lurid poems in the other. He claims to disapprove of base transactions of the flesh, but his parchments say otherwise, especially the one titled The Nun's Secret Garden, which has suspiciously accurate architectural details of the brothel's back room. And of course, we can't forget the town watch. They walk the alley twice a night, once to pretend they're checking for crime, the second time to drop off coins for Sibella, unofficial protection money, although it's unclear who's protecting whom. Historical curiosity pill. In many towns, local governments collected fines or rents from brothels. Some even had official keepers of women who registered sex workers like livestock, proving that bureaucracy will find a way no matter how awkward. But the tension isn't just in whispers and sideways glances. It's in the shifting economy. Tonight, for instance, The baker's apprentice stomps into the collar, demanding to speak with Sibella. His master is furious. "Business is down," he says. "Too many men buying favors instead of bread." He calls the girls leeches and parasites, and Sibella, in her usual calm, velvet-clad way, reminds him that most of his flour was paid for by those very same leeches. Meanwhile, across the alley, the parish guild is in heated discussion over the corrupting influence of sin. This involves 3 cups of ale, 2 rounds of dice, and one merchant admitting, off the record, that he met his second wife in that very brothel. It's the town's worst-kept secret. The brothel is part of the social fabric. Discreet deals are made there. Marriages are dodged. Wills are changed. Even the plague doctor visits, though no one dares ask why he needs to rent a room once a month. But not everyone turns a blind eye. This week, a bishop is rumored to be visiting from York. Word spreads fast, through bakers, barbers, and that one guy who sweeps mud, but somehow knows everything. And when news hits the collar, it's met with the kind of urgency usually reserved for fire or royal decrees. Sibella calls a meeting. The girls must wear their cleanest dresses, read, least stained, use the good comb, read, missing 2 teeth, and act respectable, read, don't greet the bishop with winking. Even the straw on the floor is changed, though it fights back. Edric, who happens to be in the building while all this unfolds, purely for research purposes, of course, is asked politely to leave out the side door. He trips over a chicken. You see, brothels weren't just scandalous footnotes. They were deeply entangled in medieval urban life, tolerated, taxed, resented, and relied upon. A contradiction with curtains. By the time the bishop arrives, most of the alley is pretending to be holy. Shopkeepers chant. Children are made to look clean and temporarily unferal. Even old Marjorie ties her hair with a ribbon and hides her usual fish knife. But no one fools the bishop. He knows exactly what kind of street Rose Alley is. He blesses the bakery. He nods at the butcher. He stops in front of the collar, pauses just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, then raises his hand and moves on. He doesn't shut it down. He doesn't even look surprised, just nods to Sibella, who curtsies deeply and doesn't say a word. And as he turns the corner, every window along the street suddenly becomes very busy. Curtains flutter. Doors reopen. The alley exhales. Because life, after all, must go on, with gossip, judgment, and a little coin changing hands under the table. Next time, we step into the festering heart of contradiction, the local church. Because nothing says moral clarity like preaching chastity 2 blocks from a place that sells hot wine and broken dreams. If medieval society were a particularly unstable stew, equal parts superstition, hypocrisy, and boiled cabbage, then the church was the wooden spoon stirring it with righteous vigor. It didn't matter if you were a peasant, a merchant, or a brothel madam with suspiciously expensive candle holders. Religion shaped your daily routine, your worldview, and, most importantly, your shame schedule. Let's return to Edric, who once again finds himself awake before dawn in his cold bed beside his wife, Beatrice, a woman who prays loudly, fasts aggressively, and has recently accused their cow of moral weakness. Beatrice spends her mornings reciting psalms and clutching her rosary like it owes her money. Edric, in contrast, spends his mornings contemplating how many sins he can commit before breakfast and still make it to confession. Because today is Sunday, and that means church. Now, you might expect Edric to feel some apprehension. After all, he spent Thursday evening in the company of Ismena, who sang bawdy rhymes about monks and somehow managed to break the only good stool in the room. But this is 1352, and cognitive dissonance is practically a sacrament. At sunrise, the church bells ring, sharp, relentless, and about as subtle as divine judgment. Everyone files toward St. Guthlax, the town's draftiest building and most effective guilt dispenser. The congregation includes farmers in straw-stuffed shoes, housewives in sour wool, and a suspicious number of people avoiding eye contact with each other. The pews groan under the weight of penance and unspoken grievances. The priest, Father Ethelwine, begins the sermon with his usual blend of Latin mumbling, fire and brimstone threats, and vaguely passive-aggressive reminders about tithes. He warns of temptation, fornication, and women who smile too much on market day. He speaks of eternal damnation with the passion of a man who hasn't smiled since 1294. Historical curiosity pill. In medieval England, priests were often poorly educated, barely celibate, and frequently the most morally ambiguous person in the village. Many kept unofficial housekeepers who mysteriously gave birth every other year. Now, here's the twist. Everyone knows Father Ethelwine has a particular fondness for dried pears, dice games, and the company of Sibella from the bishop's collar. It's town knowledge. It's not even whispered anymore. Last Lent, someone embroidered it into an altar cloth by accident. But the brilliance of medieval morality lies in its flexibility. As long as you confessed your sins, gave the church its share, and occasionally looked sad in public, you could mostly carry on. The goal wasn't purity, it was plausible deniability. Edric kneels on the stone floor, contemplates his many recent indiscretions, and gives God a half-hearted apology wrapped in vague promises to try harder. He glances sideways at Osbert the scrivener, who also frequents the collar, and is now murmuring a prayer with such fervor you'd think he'd never seen a petticoat in his life. Communion is served, stale wafers and watered wine. Beatrice bows her head so low she might sprain her neck. Edric wonders if he can sneak out early to check on a business shipment. Spoiler, he can't. Beatrice has a grip like a blacksmith's clamp and isn't above hissing. After the sermon comes confession. This, theoretically, is where one purges the soul. In practice, it's a medieval talent show of selective memory and creative phrasing. Edric enters the confessional and is greeted by Father Ethelwine's voice through a thin wooden screen. "My son," the priest intones, "speak your sins." Edric hesitates, then chooses a safe path. "I spoke harshly to my apprentice, and may have coveted another man's ox cart." There's a long pause. Father Ethelwine coughs. "Anything else?" "I might have overindulged in ale." "Of course. Say 5 Hail Marys, and avoid ox carts." And just like that, Edric is clean, spiritually. He walks out into the sunlight feeling lighter, holier, and only moderately concerned that last night's encounter with Lynn may have left him with more than just memories. Meanwhile, Beatrice joins the parish gossip circle, where 3 older women, the Holy Trinity of Judgment, whisper about the butcher's wife's hemline and whether Avis at the brothel is really that pregnant. The town's morality exists in layers. There's what's preached, what's practiced, and what's quietly forgiven after the right donation. The church condemns the brothel, but taxes its land. The priest scolds lust, but accepts cider from women who call him dear. And the townspeople? They attend Mass, confess, and then head to the collar for a drink and a joke about St. Cecilia. Because here's the great secret of medieval piety. It's not about perfection. It's about performance. Guilt is a ritual. Confession is a pressure valve. And forgiveness? That's just one silver penny away. As Edric walks home, he passes Sibella, dressed modestly for once, basket in hand. They nod to each other like two co-workers in the world's least discussed profession. Neither of them speaks. They don't need to. Because in this town, sin is a cycle. Everyone plays their part. And the curtain is already rising on the next act. Next time, we step into the crumbling halls of medicine, where healing often involves boiled leeches, prayers to Saint Fiacre, and questionable ointments made of pig's fat and crushed regret. Let's say, for a moment, that you've just emerged from a long night in the bishop's collar. Heart lightened, coin purse considerably heavier in spiritual debt, and a vague itch you're trying not to think about. The sun is up, the streets are muddy, and somewhere in the back of your throat is the taste of cheap wine and bad decisions. Congratulations. It's time to meet the medieval medical system. Now, you may be thinking, surely if things went wrong, I could see a doctor. Ah, sweet optimist. That word does not mean what you think it means. In 1352, the term doctor is applied liberally to anyone with a robe, a beard, and an opinion. There's the university-trained physician who believes disease is caused by planets misbehaving. There's the barber surgeon, whose toolkit includes a saw, a bowl, and no concept of hygiene. And then there's the wise woman, who lives near the edge of town, sells potions in reused eggshells, and may or may not be the reason your neighbor's chickens stopped laying eggs. Edric finds himself in need of such services not long after what he refers to as the unfortunate thigh incident. Without going into uncomfortable anatomical detail, let's just say something is now swollen, painful, and possibly sentient. Historical curiosity pill. In medieval Europe, sexually transmitted infections were known, feared, and utterly misunderstood. Treatments ranged from herbal compresses to mercury ointments, which is like trying to cure a cough with arsenic tea. Edric, understandably, begins with the physician. He's a large man with a terrifying collection of glass jars, all filled with substances in various shades of despair. He frowns, asks Edric if he's been near any damp widows, and consults a chart of astrological signs. Apparently, Mars is angry, Venus is weeping, and Edric's bladder is aligned with a goat. The treatment? A purgative. He's given a concoction made from boiled rhubarb, cow bile, and what the physician confidently calls blessed vinegar. The result is dramatic. It fixes absolutely nothing, but Edric becomes intimately acquainted with the bucket in the corner. Next stop, the barber surgeon. He offers to lance the swelling. With a knife, he just used to trim someone's beard. Edric politely declines, sits very still, and backs out of the room like someone trying not to startle a bear. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, and walking now more of a spirited hobble, Edric visits Ismena. Not for services this time, for help. Because here's something no one likes to admit. The women of the brothel often knew more about health than the professionals. They had to. When you sleep with strangers for a living, you either learn how to prevent disaster, or you don't last long. Ismena takes one look at Edric's symptoms and sighs like a woman who has seen this exact problem 47 times. She produces a jar of goose fat, crushed nettles, and something that smells suspiciously of pickled herbs and salt. Apply this, she says, but not too much, or you'll itch like a wool-clad dog in summer. She also recommends a bath. With soap, Edric balks. That's two radical ideas in one sentence. Historical curiosity pill. Medieval sex workers often used rudimentary contraception and herbal treatments, more so than many wives. pennyroyal, rue, and mugwort were commonly used, though not always safe. Edric follows her advice, reluctantly. He bathes, he applies, he mutters prayers to Saint Roch, patron of plagues, pustules, and other cheerful things. And over the next few days, he improves, which is both a relief and a terrifying precedent. Because now, he owes Ismena more than coin. He owes her his actual functional limbs. This prompts a small, rare crisis of conscience. He starts bringing her gifts. Bread that doesn't break teeth, dried pears, even a small pouch of cloves. Beatrice notices, of course. She's been giving him that long, silent stare that medieval wives use when deciding whether or not to poison your stew. Eventually, Edric returns to the collar, but not as a customer. He asks to speak with Sibella. He offers to sponsor the repair of the roof, which leaks on rainy nights and has been the cause of at least 3 slippery exits and 1 goose-related injury. Sibella squints at him. "What's the catch?" she asks. "No catch," says Edric. "Just, it's been a strange week." She nods. "You're not the first man to find salvation at the bottom of a jar of pickled herbs." So the roof gets patched. The girls get sturdier straw. Ismena gets a new cloak, one that doesn't smell like fermented laundry. And Edric? He walks a little taller, still morally questionable, still mildly itchy, but perhaps, ever so slightly, changed. Because here's the quiet truth no one wrote down in the illuminated manuscripts. Medieval brothels weren't just places of scandal and sin. They were survival engines. They were clinics, shelters, confessional booths, and family for the ones society forgot. They existed not in the shadows, but in plain view, because everyone needed them, and no one wanted to say it out loud. And sometimes, the most human moments in history don't happen in castles or courts. They happen on cracked wooden floors, beneath a leaking roof, with a jar of questionable ointment, and a woman who knows how to save your sorry hide. Now, roll over, breathe through your nose, and rest easy. You've made it through 5 parts of medieval debauchery, bureaucracy, and badly brewed remedies. And unlike Edric, you won't need a poultice in the morning. The third history is why you wouldn't last a confession as the priest, hearing medieval working girls. Imagine walking into your first job full of hope, faith, and a modest fear of hellfire, only to end up ankle-deep in the moral quagmire of the town's least reputable cottage. Welcome to Father Arnulf's life, and congratulations, you are now him. It is the year 1357. You are 42 years old. You've got thinning hair, 2 workable teeth, and a tunic so threadbare it's practically a theological metaphor. Your church is a lopsided stone chapel that leaks from all 4 directions. Your congregation includes 6 sheep, 3 actual humans, and at least 1 ghost who moans during evensong but tithes nothing. But today is special. Today is Confession Day, a spiritual checkpoint where the village's most colorful souls come to unburden their sins, cough up some guilt, and ideally leave without stealing the chalice. And your first penitent? Not the baker with his bread-waiting fraud, not the blacksmith who swears during every hammer strike. No, it's Isabel. She enters like she owns the nave, all hips and incense. Her voice is gravel soaked in honey. Her skirt is shorter than the list of saints who'd approve, and she smells like rosemary and financial opportunity. That's because Isabel is a working girl, one of 6 who operate discreetly, read not discreetly, from a thatched roof brothel politely described as Madame Loretta's place of healing and cheese. You clear your throat, which doesn't help, mostly because it turns into a coughing fit, and you accidentally inhale a piece of last night's communion bread, which you forgot to chew properly. "Forgive me, Father," Isabel says, lowering herself to her knees. It's less of a pious posture and more of a stage direction. You close your eyes, for focus, for mercy, for not accidentally looking anywhere you shouldn't. "I confess I've committed sins of the flesh," she begins. No surprises there. But it wasn't just the usual this time. I may have encouraged a knight to skip Mass, and I called a friar a clucking hen when he tried to bless me mid-shift. Ah, progress. The real challenge isn't the sins. You've heard worse. Much worse. There was that time Ulfric the swineherd confessed to romantic feelings for his pig. You didn't ask follow-up questions. You still lie awake wondering. No, the problem isn't the content. It's the delivery. See, Isabel doesn't just confess. She performs. Each sin is a dramatic monologue. There are props, a subtle fan flourish. At one point, she quotes a troubadour's poem while winking. She's not sorry. She's doing a matinee. You assign her 3 Hail Marys, a psalm, and a private lecture about modesty, which she thanks you for by adjusting her bodice in a manner that adds 3 more sins to the list. And she's just the beginning. Next comes Agathe, a former nun turned business partner of Madame Loretta. She's decided God is fine with her profession as long as she keeps the pricing fair and tithes generously. She calls her brothel income a community tithe in kind. Her confession includes an incident with a roasted goose, 3 noblemen, and a bottle of imported syrup that probably violated at least 5 canon laws and 2 local fire ordinances. You genuinely black out during part of it. By the time she leaves, you're clutching your rosary like it might sprout into a weapon. Then comes Clarice, sweet Clarice, who has all the flirtation skills of a trebuchet. Her confessions are shouted, loudly, for maximum spiritual coverage. The entire nave hears her describe, in detail, a series of liaisons involving a traveling juggler and some experimental balancing. A candle melts sideways in solidarity. You try not to scream. And then, oh then, comes Lisette, the new girl, 18 years old, fresh from a plague-ridden village, eyes wide as dinner plates and morals still under negotiation. She sits in the confessional like it's a throne of doom. I don't know what to say," she whispers. You think? Finally, a simple confession, some quiet remorse, a chance to reconnect with my vocation. Then she bursts into tears and tells you everything. Her childhood, her fears, her first kiss, her future plans, her mother's onion stew recipe, her terrifying affection for goats, her crush on the town executioner whom she describes as hauntingly shaped. She doesn't stop for 45 minutes. You develop a leg cramp. You consider faking your own death to escape. It's only part 1 of your day, and it's just beginning. As the candles burn low and the stone chapel fills with the vague scent of guilt and perfume, you begin to question everything. Your calling, your career path, your continued existence. But you are a priest, and you will endure. You always do. Even if tomorrow promises the return of Isabel, a rooster-themed confession, and Agatha's illustrated sin journal. You take a deep breath. You close the confession screen. You whisper, "Lord, deliver me from this." And somewhere above, you swear you hear laughter. Last time on Father Arnulf's terrible, no good, very medieval confession day, you met the town's most theatrically sinful working girls. And somehow, they're still not the worst part. It's morning again, And your chapel smells like old incense, cold stone, and spiritual dread. You didn't sleep? Not really. Who could sleep after Clarice's detailed monologue involving juggling and nudity? Your dreams were haunted by acrobatic sinners and a goose that may or may not have spoken Latin. Now the bells ring. You flinch. It's confession hour again. And today, it's raining. Not a gentle drizzle. No, this is medieval rain. A divine downpour. The kind of biblical soaking that has you scanning the sky for pairs of animals. The door creaks open, and there she is, Madame Loretta herself. You've read about demons in goat form, about succubi in the wilderness, about temptation incarnate in red shoes. But none of that prepared you for Loretta, the Madam of Sin, the Queen of Customer Retention, and the only woman in town who wears velvet during a thunderstorm. "Good morning, Father," she says, as though you're about to discuss upholstery and not mortal peril. She doesn't kneel. She lounges in the front pew like it's a fainting couch. You're not sure if she's here to confess or inspect the chapel for renovations. "I've been meaning to come by," she says, brushing imaginary dust off her bodice. "But business has been so good lately. Praise be." You're uncertain who exactly she's praising. You feel like it's not the intended deity. "I have some sins," she continues breezily, "but they're mostly administrative." You blink. You were not prepared for clerical sin. She explains. Apparently, last week she lied about having a monk's blessing for a spiritual massage event. She also shortchanged a bishop's cousin, referred to St. Agnes as a bit of a prude, and accidentally hosted a card game during Lent. She claims it was educational. You mutter something about penance. She asks if she can write it off as a business expense. The rain outside intensifies. Somewhere in the rafters, something drips in rhythm with your blood pressure. Loretta leans forward. "Can I ask you something, Father?" she says. You tense. "Do you think my girls will go to heaven?" You blink again. This wasn't in your seminary training. You were taught Latin declensions and the theological symbolism of hay. Not how to answer complicated moral philosophy from a woman wearing a corset with embroidered saints. You stammer something about grace and redemption. You say the word contrition 3 times like it's a spell. You accidentally knock over a candle. Loretta nods, stands, and gives you a wink that contains 3 heresies and a migraine. "Good," she says, "because I'm planning to outlive all of them." She leaves. You collapse onto a bench and stare into the middle distance. You're cold. You're damp. And you're starting to suspect that hell is just an endless loop of medieval confessions with no coffee. But there's no time to despair. The door creaks again. It's Isabel. Again. You internally scream. "Forgive me, Father," she begins. You don't even respond. You just wave her in like a traumatized innkeeper with no clean rooms. Today's sins are less risque and more logistically horrifying. She confesses to selling indulgences as a joke. She claims it was performance art. She admits to blessing clients with holy water she found behind the ale barrels. She once whispered the Lord's Prayer backward, just to see if anything happened. You tell her she needs confession for her confession. She pouts. You panic. She starts listing names, important ones. Local landowners, that tax official with the mole, the mayor's brother, even the bishop's scribe. You suddenly realize something terrifying. You're not hearing their confessions, but you're hearing about them, in very specific, very actionable detail. Congratulations, you're now carrying the full social scandal dossier of the village. You're a moral filing cabinet without a lock, and canon law says you can't tell anyone, not the bishop, not the bailiff, not even the chicken who keeps sneaking into the nave. If someone walks in and says, "Father Arnulf, did you know the baker once?" you have to say, "No, I absolutely do not." Even if the baker has been described in 4K detail by 3 different sinners and once asked to be tied up using rosary beads, you're sitting on a powder keg of spiritual secrets. And the fuse is Agathe. She bursts in next, wind-blown and euphoric. "Father," she shouts, "great news! I've found religion." You drop your prayer book. "Oh yes," she continues, "after some light sinning last night with a nobleman and a traveling apothecary, I saw a vision. I think I'm ready to become a nun again." You don't blink. You simply disassociate. Agatha explains her plan. She wants to open a holy retreat for spiritual cleansing and possibly mud wraps. She asks if she can borrow a relic, or maybe 3, just for ambiance. She asks what penance she'll need to perform to get back into God's good graces. You tell her she'll need to meditate for 40 days, fast every 3rd sunrise, and recite the Psalms until her tongue begs for mercy. She nods enthusiastically. "So, it's like a detox?" You nod. Spirit broken. She thanks you and exits, whistling a tavern song. In Latin. The rain stops. You remain seated. You consider writing to the bishop, but then you remember that he's probably mentioned by name in half these confessions, possibly with goats. You cannot be sure. Instead, you take a breath. You sip the sacramental wine. You light another candle, and you whisper, "Dear Lord, please send me a nice old widow with arthritis and mild regrets." But instead, you hear footsteps, healed ones, and laughter. A new girl's arrived. She's already humming something unholy. And it's only Tuesday. Previously, on Confessions from the Damp Corner of Despair, Father Arnulf learned that medieval sin comes in velvet, smells like goat sweat and rose water, and tells you everyone's secrets whether you want them or not. It's been 3 days since Agatha tried to requisition holy relics for her spiritual spa. 3 long days. You've attempted to cleanse the chapel with incense, salt, and strong denial. You even asked Brother Willibald, the assistant bell ringer who once failed out of monk school, to sprinkle extra holy water. He spilled it on himself and apologized to the font. So you're still spiritually saturated with other people's sin, and the nave smells vaguely like desperation and mutton. And now, just before matins, she arrives. Her name is Heloise, the new girl. She's barely 5 feet tall, wrapped in an overwashed wool shawl, and wearing the expression of someone who once saw a demon and told it off for tracking mud inside. She approaches the confessional not with shyness, but with the confident exhaustion of a woman who has seen things, horrifying things, like tax audits or medieval dentistry. "Forgive me, Father," she says, sliding in without a pause. "Go on, my child," you answer, as you always do, even though at this point you're fairly sure you're a cautionary tale in some future monk's bedtime story. "I confess that I lied," she says, "about my name, my age, my experience level, my skill with lute playing." You open your mouth to ask why, but she's already rolling. Turns out, she faked her resume to get a spot in Loretta's establishment. "I told them I once performed for a count," she explains. "It was actually just a dog named Count." You blink slowly. "Then I said I could sing in Latin. I can't." But I did hum along with the monks back in Saumur until they kicked me out for rhythmic clapping. She pauses. Her eyes are earnest, hopeful, like she still thinks there's a clean way out of this town. I guess I just wanted to belong somewhere, even if it was here. You nod because you're too tired to cry. I also may have tried to write a hymn, she adds, using bits of a tavern song and something I misheard in Mass. You ask what it's called. She says, "O Lord, why'd you make me this hot?" You consider flagellating yourself with a pew cushion. After assigning penance, 3 psalms and a firm talking to with an actual monk, you rise from the confessional, only to hear a voice from behind the altar. Father Arnulf, says a high nasal tone you'd recognize anywhere. It's Clarice's mother. Not Clarice, her mother. You take a slow, resigned breath, because nothing good follows that voice. This is the woman who once accused the baker of witchcraft by croissant, and who insists her daughter is just misunderstood and very flexible. She is also, unfortunately, here to confess. You motion her into the booth. She brings her own stool, and a jug of wine, and possibly an agenda. "I have sinned, Father," she says, settling in with the enthusiasm of a bard preparing for a scandal ballad. "Last week, I sold love potions that were really just mashed beets and turnip water. I charged extra for the ones with rosemary, because that smells fancy. I also told someone I was a prophet. I just repeated what Madame Loretta said over stew." You remind her that impersonating a prophet is technically blasphemy. She shrugs and sips her wine. "I was right, though. The mayor did fall off his mule." You're not sure whether to add or subtract penance for that. I also cursed at my neighbor for stealing my laundry, which, frankly, she deserved, and I may have placed a dead chicken on her doorstep as a message. You suggest she may want to confess to vengeance. She corrects you. No, not vengeance. Theatrical foreshadowing. I'm working on my reputation." She stands, adjusts her cloak, and says, "3 Ave Marias, yes? And a side of your sermon leftovers? Thank you, Father. You're a treasure." You are not a treasure. You are a sponge soaked in moral vinegar. But there's no time to wallow, because the next person through the door isn't a sinner. It's Brother Odo, the bishop's errand monkey, and he has parchment, with a seal. You open it with hands trembling from decades of disappointment. It's from the bishop. He's coming. Tomorrow. To audit your confessional records. You can't breathe. He'll want to know who's been confessing, what sins were discussed, which moral breaches have been addressed. And you can't tell him, because canon law says you must protect the secrecy of confession, even if your hair catches fire. You ask Brother Odo how long the bishop plans to stay. Odo shrugs. "Depends how much sin there is to supervise, I suppose." You nearly vomit into the offering basket. That night, you attempt to pray, but every time you close your eyes, you see Clarice's mother with a chicken, Loretta's smirk, Agata's spa plans, and a Latin tavern hymn echoing in your skull. Sleep comes in fits. You dream of being excommunicated by a jury of goats, and in the gray haze of morning, one single thought burns through your soul like a hot ember of medieval clarity. You have one day to prepare, and you're going to need a miracle, or a very, very creative definition of minor venial sin. Last time, Father Arnulf received the worst kind of news. The bishop is coming to audit his confessional records. In a village where the most honest person is a girl who faked her name, hymns, and resume to become a part-time bard at a brothel. The sun rises with all the gentleness of a heretic's torch. Your back hurts. Your brain itches. Your cassock smells like candle wax, mildew, and regret. There is a hollow ache behind your eyes where inner peace used to be. You haven't slept. You tried. You even lay in your straw mattress and whispered a few desperate psalms, but your mind was too busy compiling a list of unspeakable sins confessed in the last fortnight, and deciding which ones could reasonably be called metaphorical. You pace the chapel, rearranging things that don't need rearranging. The candlesticks, the hymnals, your own sense of dignity. The bishop could arrive at any moment, and if he asks about Clarice's theologically flexible gymnastics, you may simply have to burst into flames on the spot. At mid-morning, the door creaks open. But it's not the bishop. It's Loretta, in full silk, wearing earrings shaped like tiny angels holding whips. Probably ironic. She strides in with the casual authority of a duchess who once blackmailed half the court and got promoted for it. Behind her trails Eloise, looking nervous, and Isabel, looking smug. Agathe is not present, which likely means she's either seducing a bishop's horse or experimenting with herbal wine again. "Father," Loretta says, clasping her hands in mock piety, "we hear you have a visitor coming. Important one. Pointy hat, frowny disposition, unlikely to appreciate your more avant-garde parishioners." You narrow your eyes. Isabel smiles like someone who's found out she holds all the cards and just added a few new ones with drawings. Loretta continues, "We thought we might help. You've always been accommodating." You're not sure if that's a compliment or a thinly veiled reminder that you never reported them for the incident with the choir boy, the goose, and the wine cellar. "What kind of help?" you ask cautiously. "Well," says Loretta, "we're prepared to make a few things disappear." She lists them off like items on a picnic menu. The part where Clarice reenacted a saint's martyrdom in lace and nothing else? Forgotten. The weekly tavern liturgy Agatha invented? Cancelled. The confessional drawings Isabel started selling under the title Illustrated Sin for Devout Men of Leisure? Retracted. "We'll tidy up," she says. "Make your little corner of the world look holier than a bishop's wine rack." There is a pause. You know there's a catch. There's always a catch. And here it comes. "All we ask," Loretta adds, "is that you help us renovate the chapel." You blink. What? "The acoustics are terrible," Eloise pipes up. "I tried humming during confession, and it sounded like I was drowning in a wine barrel." You want to use the chapel for singing? For healing performances, Loretta corrects. Once a week. Tickets optional. Saints-themed, obviously. Think of it as spiritual cabaret. You think of it, and briefly taste your own mortality. You take a moment, breathe deeply, inhale incense, exhale career ruin, but you're desperate. The bishop will expect order, reverence, and clear records. You currently have none of those things. What you do have is a ledger full of unprintable acts and a nervous tick whenever anyone says rope swing. So you agree. "Fine," you croak. "No saints on stilts. No goats in costume. 1 hour. Candles stay on the altar. And you must wear at least 3 layers of clothing at all times." Loretta beams. Heloise claps. Isabel suggests adding wine. You pretend not to hear that last part, and then, as if summoned by your worst choices, the bishop arrives. He's tall, skeletal, and wrapped in a cloak the color of repressed enthusiasm. His hat could double as siege equipment. He carries a ledger, a quill, and the spiritual weight of a man who hasn't smiled since the year of the dung flood. "Father Arnulf," he intones, "I trust you are ready for inspection." "No, no, you are not." You offer him the good chair. He declines it with the same look you once gave a stew that moved on its own. He opens the ledger. "Let's begin with confessions," he says. You swallow hard. "Have any penitents confessed to heresy, necromancy, or song?" You blink. Pardon?" "Song," he repeats. "Chanted sin, rhythmic blasphemy. Some parishes are experimenting with music. There's been a rise in sinful jingles." You stare at him, open-mouthed. Heloise sneezes loudly from behind a column. You answer quickly. "No rhythmic heresy, just the usual. Lust, envy, marketplace fraud, minor idolatry." He nods. "Standard fare." You exhale, but too soon. "Have you received any unorthodox visitors, travelers, musicians, women with jewelry?" This time, Isabel knocks over a hymnal on purpose and mutters something about distracting architecture. You lie, boldly. "Only pilgrims, and one confused shepherd. He thought the chapel was a bathhouse." The bishop raises an eyebrow. "And your records?" You hand him a scroll. It contains exactly 0 names. Because names are forbidden. So instead, you've listed sins under titles like "The One with the Barley Incident," "Confession involving extremely improper use of saints' names," "Possibly just a dream," "Hopefully not real." The bishop reads, frowns, pauses, then he laughs. A single high-pitched wheeze that sounds like a donkey trying to hold in a cough. "These are quite vivid," he says, "but theologically sound. You've preserved anonymity, confessed no doctrinal deviation, and even included footnotes. Very responsible." You blink. "So, everything is in order?" He nods. "Indeed, I shall report to the Archbishop that your parish, though unorthodox in scent, is spiritually aligned." He pauses again. "One last thing, about the mural." You glance behind you. Oh no, Isabel. During your distraction, she has, in record time, unfurled a large tapestry behind the altar. It depicts St. George, wearing nothing but a smile and slaying a very surprised dragon with what is definitely not a sword. The bishop stares. You stare. Isabel whispers, "Limited edition." You close your eyes. The bishop clears his throat. Symbolic, bold, but within the bounds of saintly allegory. I approve. He leaves. You remain standing. And somewhere, just faintly, you hear Loretta humming a hymn that starts suspiciously like a tavern ballad and ends in applause. Previously, on Father Arnulf's reluctant guide to sin management, the bishop came, inspected, saw a tapestry of shirtless St. George, and somehow approved. Loretta's healing cabaret got conditional blessing. Heloise was not caught rhyming her confession. And Isabel added footnotes to lust. Everything is, by some divine loophole, still standing. It is now the morning after, and the village chapel, your once modest, underattended, moth-infested sanctuary, is packed. Not with repentant souls, but with paying audience members. The pews are full. The candles have been replaced with dripping bundles of something scented and mildly flammable. Madame Loretta has declared the first official Saints and Sinners showcase open for spiritual enrichment and interpretive movement. You stand at the side, cloaked in priestly garments, clutching your rosary like it owes you money. You have permitted this. You, Father Arnulf, ordained by the Holy Church, keeper of sacred rites, are currently hosting a musical where Clarice plays Saint Cecilia on a lyre made of questionable materials. And it's not bad. The singing is mostly in tune. The saints are only mildly scandalous. Agata's solo as Saint Catherine of Alexandria includes a spinning wheel, some vague theological references, and a very dramatic fainting routine that nearly takes out 2 candle holders. The villagers are enthralled. Even Brother Willibald is smiling, though he may just be distracted by the free wine. But the real surprise? The bishop came back. He arrived just before the second act, unannounced, possibly to smite someone. You braced for eternal damnation. You prepared a quick Latin apology and an escape route through the vestry window. And then he sat down, in the front row, next to Clarice's mother, who immediately offered him a honey cake and a commentary track. You are watching the Bishop of Murcia nod appreciatively, while Eloise sings a modified hymn about redemption through shared hardship and mutual foot massages. You begin to consider the possibility that you've died, and this is some kind of moral fever dream. After the curtain call, which involves actual curtains, 1 goose, and a rain of petals made from shaved turnips, the audience bursts into applause. Loretta curtsies. Isabel bows. Clarice blows kisses and narrowly avoids excommunicating herself with enthusiasm. And the bishop, the blessed, uptight, judgmental bishop, stands and begins clapping. Politely, with a dignified expression that says, "This was either heretical or deeply moving, and I'm too confused to decide." You take a breath. It is finished. Later, in the quiet dusk, you sit alone in the confession booth. The girls are gone. The goose has been returned. The petals swept away. You're left with the faint scent of lavender, wax, and whatever sin smells like when it's been professionally choreographed. And then, because of course, the door creaks open one last time. A figure enters, silent. She kneels. It's Eloise. "Forgive me, Father," she says softly. You nod, already bracing yourself for another wild tale of questionable morality and artisan wine. But instead, "I just wanted to say, thank you." You blink. "For what?" "For listening," she says. "For not yelling, for not locking the door, and for letting us be seen, even if it was through unusual methods." You can't speak. She continues, "We're not saints, not really, but we're not demons either. And for 1 hour tonight, I think we were something wholly adjacent." You exhale. There's nothing to assign, no penance, no psalm, just peace. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, you feel still. You leave the booth and walk slowly to the altar. The sun is dipping low, casting gold across the dusty stones. Outside, the village is laughing, singing. Someone's burning supper. Someone else is probably fighting a chicken. You light a candle. You don't pray. You just stand there. And in that quiet, smoky air, one final truth settles over you like a warm cloak. You are, against all odds, still the priest of this village. You've heard their sins, held their secrets, shared their stage, and somehow, by candlelight and chaos, you've kept the faith alive, even if it danced a little